As we continue to pray for the victims of the terrible tragedy and destruction in the Bahamas, we hear often enough people asking the question, why would God do this to them? Or, why would God allow this to happen? Hearing people say that, I was reminded of a hurricane several decades back. I'm not sure of the name, I think it may have been Donna, that was coming up the east coast and initially was supposed to make landfall in the Carolinas, but then it turned out to sea and instead came up and hit us. And there was a rather well-known evangelical preacher in the Carolinas who was taking credit for that. He was saying, Jesus loves us very much, and I prayed and y'all prayed, and the hurricane turned away and went up to New York. And when someone asked him, well, doesn't Jesus love the people of New York? He said, oh no, they were being punished for their sins. Just like Sodom and Gomorrah, New York is a sinful city, and so they were punished. Well, I had two reactions to that, one as a New Yorker and one as a believing Christian. As a New Yorker, I was saying to myself, yes, there are a lot of things that we're guilty for. There are a lot of sins that we commit. But I find it difficult to assume that people in other parts of the country are any less sinful than we are. Their sins may be different, but they're just as real. And of course, sadly, 2 years ago in Charlotte, it became quite obvious of the sins of white supremacy and racism, anti-Semitism, violence against others that are just as deeply sinful. It's not to deny our New York sins, but it's to say that, first of all, can we really say that God seeks to punish whole groups of people for the sins of some? Yes, there are some indications in the Hebrew scriptures of that, and the preacher mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah. But there is no place in Jesus' teaching where he talks about that. There is no place where he says that God's response to sinfulness is anything other than a desire to change, a desire to help people reform themselves, and certainly not a desire to punish whole groups of people because of some. Yes, Jesus continues to teach, as does the Old Testament, that ultimately we will be held responsible for our actions. But if we are, in the end, to lose our souls, it's going to be our doing, not a desire of a punishing God for us. But the second question becomes a little bit more difficult. Even if we're not saying, why did God do this to them? There is the question, why does God allow evil to happen? Why does God allow natural disasters to occur? Why does God allow illness to innocent children to occur? There are no easy answers to that. There are answers. It's things that we need to reflect on, to pray about, to try to discern. And I'm certainly not going to attempt to play out those answers in a homily at Mass. I do make one suggestion. There was a book written several decades ago, but I think it's still in print, by Rabbi Harold Kushner, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. It's a very insightful book. If you haven't read it, I would suggest you may want to find it, because it begins to offer answers to those questions about the reality of evil. But what I would do today is take one step beyond Rabbi Kushner to address it specifically as a Christian. You heard in the gospel passage today Jesus say that if we want to be his followers, we need to take up our cross and follow him. And sometimes God does not automatically make our difficulties go away. Sometimes God indeed asks us to bear the cross so that we can be united with Jesus in his cross, therefore being gathered to him in his resurrection. And that's not an easy thing. We'd much rather God had worked it out some other way. But we trust that ultimately God is doing this for our benefit. That ultimately, even when we are being asked to bear the cross in significant ways, that cross does indeed lead to resurrection, and that we have been baptized into the death and resurrection of Jesus, which means that there will always be those times when he does say to us, I ask you to take up the cross and follow me. But we do so in trust. We do so believing that ultimately it is for our good, that ultimately the new life that comes to us from the cross will be something that is deeper and richer than we could possibly imagine, and that we can in turn share with others to transform our world.